Pleasure to be here, and I really loved that last talk. John is awesome, so I really appreciated that. Thank you. We'll catch up. I want to talk to you about serious games. And I've got to tell you, looking at this has really given me an advantage because every time I go to that board, I go back and I change my deck. I'm like, I'm not going to talk about this. They obviously know about this one. I'm going to take this out and put this in. So much appreciated, Jonathan, for setting that up. I'm going to tell you a little bit about how I started in this field and then talk to you about the evolution of this space and where is this going. I know many people have been talking about tools and what kind of tools you might use for visualization. So I'm hoping some of the things I tell you might help people connect some dots. So I've been at IBM for about 8 years. Prior to that, I've been a serial entrepreneur in games for entertainment for about 14 years. I started several companies, one of which focused on women who play computer and console games. And I started the first scholarship program for women to pursue degrees in game design and development here in the US. And then there was this big shift in the market, and Nintendo came out with the Wii, and suddenly everybody was talking about casual games and how do we go after more than the hardcore gamer. So I went back to business school so I could learn more about going after VC funding and starting a studio. And when I was there, I threw myself into something that are called case competitions. And this is when businesses will go to a business school with a real-life challenge. And the students have overnight to form teams and then propose solutions the next day. So I was on my 6th one, and IBM comes to the school, competition between UNC and Duke, big basketball rivals, right? And the challenge was that they had business process management software, and they were looking for innovative ways of explaining it to non-techies. At the time, I had no clue what business process management was. They handed us a stack of papers about this thick. They said, read this. So I'm reading it, and I'm saying, okay, so any kind of an organization who has something to produce, right, whether it's a service or whether it's a product, there's a certain set of steps in which that organization has to go through in order to meet key goals. So I'm reading about this and the use cases, and I'm thinking, this is a strategy game. At the time, I was really big into city sims and strategy games, multiplayer. Like, this is a strategy game. Tweak the different business rules, seeing how it affects your broader ecosystem. So I tell my teammates, I say, hey, we need to pitch a strategy game. And there was this one guy on my team. We ended up arguing till 2 in the morning because he says games are for kids. IBM's never going to go for this idea. They're way too conservative. Forget it. We argue. I say the average age of the gamer today is 35 years old. 43% of PC gamers, 38% of console gamers are women. Right? We need to do this. He picks up his stuff and he leaves the room. So the rest of us, the rest of the team, we go up and we present the strategy game. And the vice president at the time for strategy at IBM was one of the judges. And she pulls me aside right after the pitch and she says, I'm going to fund this idea right now. Can you make it for me in 3 months? And I'm like, 3 months? It takes years to make a really good video game. How are you going to make a game in 3 months? I said, it took World of Warcraft 8 years to make it, and they're still fixing the kinks. And she says, well, I'm just looking for a proof of concept to see if you can even use a video game to help explain something as complex as business process management to people. And so I started interning at IBM, making this game for them in the space of 3 months. I got really lucky. I worked with a local game studio and an awesome team at IBM. And we created a game called Innovate. And we put it out for free to schools worldwide. And we had, in 6 months, over 1,000 universities using that game, many of which is part of their core curriculum, right? And then we released another version of the game because we were thinking, wow, is it just schools who would be interested in using games to help explain business process management? And we came out with the next version, which was like a supply chain game, and we did another one on traffic management. These games became our #1 lead-generating assets on the internet, right? We came out with a city sim game called City One. How is it that cities might be able to be smarter? How could they predict different things? Needless to say, since then, I was asked to incubate serious games at IBM. But I want to talk to you about how to position this and what I'm seeing. So when I speak with customers, they tell me that the great majority of their investments have been with regards to coming out with the right number for things, right? The right models. They spend a ton of money on models. But what they do when they put all this money into coming up with models is they say, look, we came up with this great number for you. They give it to their employees, and the employees scratch their heads and say, what am I supposed to do with this? How am I supposed to change what I do? Why is this meaningful to me? Why should I believe you? Am I supposed to remember this, right? So it's technology-centric versus people-centric. And I know, obviously, having been here this day, I don't need to convince you of this, people-centric engagement, whereas most times when I speak to customers, I do have to convince them of that. But really, blending these three together is where I see a tremendous amount of opportunity. And I'm going to give you some examples. Think about some of the games out on the market today, right? You think about some of these multiplayer real-time strategy games. You think of games like EVE Online. This is StarCraft 2 and one of the more recent City Sim games, right? They are so adept at explaining complex systems. I cannot underscore this enough. How is it that you manage your resources in order to evolve your civilization in a city? Load balancing games, right? How is it that you might be able to manipulate it and work with other partners in order to collaborate and do new things, right? Incredibly adept at explaining complex systems, and this is what we learned early on. These are all the different ways in which we've been using games, right? Not just to teach, not just to market, as I mentioned, business process management, but certainly all of these things influencing people. I come from the state of North Carolina. John, to your point, I love that idea. I really want to bring it back to my state because we're all over the news. Supreme Court, right, busted the North Carolina legislature for gerrymandering. Would be nice to have the democracy machine. So influence is up there, right? Being able to recruit, optimize teams, but really the holy grail is the transformation of cultures. Big time, a huge interest. And I'm talking about customers across industry, right? From defense, right, who's looking beyond the first-person shooter to train platoons. They're looking at transforming cultures, to be more innovative, to get data that might be in the lower echelons up at the top, right, to insurance companies, banking, finance, healthcare. We're really seeing it across the board. Now, what we see, if you think about this little square down here, skills training, about 99% of the investments in serious games have been focused on skills training games. And evidence has shown that when you make these games well, asterisk, ask me later what that means, when you make them well, it can improve retention of knowledge by over 108%. And this is according to the Kaufman Foundation. So they did some great public reports on this. It replaces or augments very costly face-to-face training, right? But what we see as the opportunity is when you start to integrate real data and real processes within these games, you can start to make games for strategic execution and tactical operations. And what I mean by this is, think down here with skills training, your funder, your investor, is typically your chief learning officer, right? Whereas when you make games for strategic execution, tactical operations, your funder, your investor, the owner, might be your head of operations. It might be your head of HR. So it's a completely different business model. And the return on investment for games that are up here in your top right-hand quadrant, your return on investment is optimized processes, right? Much more so than just augmenting or replacing costly face-to-face training, right? So I'm going to give you some of my favorite examples, and Jonathan, I know you'll appreciate this one with Aromatic Sky One. We were talking last night, and he was describing this game. I'm like, I know this game. This is in my deck. Do you guys know this? Have you heard of this? Okay, I've ripped out a ton of case studies from my deck because I figured, oh, they've heard this one, they've heard that one. So this one, this was actually shown off at the big ITSEC conference down in Orlando a couple of years ago. And what they've done is, and I'm sure ask Jonathan for more details because he actually knows the developer. But basically, it was a game that was made for med school students. And what they wanted to do was they wanted to train med school students not about triage or medicine, but how to overcome and deal with stress. So when you're playing this game, and you're triaging patients, if you don't keep your heart rate down, right, you can't win. right? You can't actually get through these lines. So you have to be able to manage your stress. This game right here, this is a horror game that you play hooked up to biofeedback devices. It's called Nevermind, right? And unless you keep your heart rate down, the game gets scarier, right? Interesting, so I go to the Game Developers Conference every year. GDC out in San Francisco, not far from here. I highly recommend you go. There was a game that you play also hooked up to biofeedback devices that measures your brainwave patterns, right? And it's a multiplayer role-playing game with superheroes. And you can't render your superhero invisible unless you can go into a semi-meditative state, right? So you can start to imagine, what do you do with games like that? What do you do? And how could it transform healthcare? Right? Stress management. What do you do with cardiac arrest patients in the defense industry, right? This is a game, a casual game. You've got these toothpick kinds of things. This is sort of like World of Goo. I don't know if you guys remember that. Casual game, you're trying to reach this glowing orb up at the top. You can play in single player mode and multiplayer mode. In less than 8 minutes, even if you can't reach the glowing orb up at the top, it will determine what kind of a critical thinker you are. Right? How do you approach problem solving? If you play in a multiplayer environment, it will assess what your leadership skills are. If you play with, this is all in Hungarian, by the way. If you play within an organization, it will determine what your optimal team is, given how each person approaches problem solving. Fascinating, right? To see how is it that games might be able to transform talent management, recruiting, assessing. So really what we see is an intersection, a confluence of technologies today, which is really enabling an immense amount of innovation, right? You've got incredibly sophisticated games engines, right, that have never been cheaper, right? I've got the Unity and the Unreal Gaming Engine. You know, the Unreal Gaming Engine used to cost $1 million a license. Now it's free, okay? Just to give you a sense. We've got this tremendous need out in the market, and you've heard it all day. Data deluge, how do we collaborate? How do we make sense? How do we visualize complexity? How do we make better decisions? And you've got the ability to integrate real data and real processes within this in order to create something new. So here's what the expectation is. This space is evolving so quickly. I cannot underscore this enough. It's gone well beyond using games for training people how to do things, right? There's organizations who are looking at this in all kinds of ways, as I mentioned before, including transformation of cultures. Have you guys read this book? Ender's Game? Who's read it? Okay, this is imperative. This is your homework assignment if you have not read this book. And the movie does not count. The one with Harrison Ford, it does not count. Does not count. No. So this is actually required reading for officers within the US military today, okay? This is a book that's was written in the 80s, a fantasy book about a boy who becomes the world's greatest military leader through playing games. And unbeknownst to him, as a byproduct of his gameplay, he's directly affecting his environment. And I'm not gonna say another word because I'll give away way too many spoilers. It's absolutely imperative you read this, okay? So this was actually the last chart I had in a deck when I was presenting to the Department of Defense. So after I had made these games I had described to you about business process management and smarter cities, I was invited by the DoD to go and present at a big enterprise architecture summit. And right before I got up to talk, this 4-star general gets up and he shows a chart. Now this 4-star, he was responsible for United States Transportation Command. And if you don't know who US Transcom is, they manage the logistics across all the branches of the military. So when there's an event or catastrophe that happens, they've got to work with all the branches of the military, other NGOs, other organizations in order to get the right stuff to the right place at the right time, at the right cost, okay? This 4-star gets up. He says, look at what has happened in this world in the last 9 months that we've had to respond to. Earthquakes in Haiti, tsunamis in Japan, volcanoes going off in Iceland, these trade routes being compromised, blah, 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 blah. I mean, he lists off 20 plus things. And he says, how can we as an organization have ever been able to be prepared for even a subset of things on this list, much less all of them? But But he says, even more importantly, how can we as an organization have been able to vet what we're supposed to do with everybody we've got to work with? How can we have created a dynamic best practice playbook, right? So we're all on board when these things hit. And he says, we're looking towards serious games as a means to do this, okay? So then he hands the podium over to me, and I told them everything I told you, right? And this was my last chart. I said, where this is going is you've got the ability, when you integrate real data and real processes within these games, such that the byproduct of your gameplay is that you're optimizing a process and you're doing it collectively, okay? It isn't just about the data, it's about getting the psychological buy-in. So like that other judge who pulled me aside, he pulls me aside after the talk and he says, what are you doing a month from now? Can you come back and show me what a game would look like for logistics innovation, right? Pick a topic, logistics innovation, come back, show it to me. I said, okay. So 1 week before I'm supposed to go back, I get a call from his assistant who says, the general wants you to invite whomever you want from the games industry to make that vision a reality. If you want to invite the president of Nintendo, invite the president of Nintendo. I said, sir, it's 1 week before the conference. How am I going to get the president of Nintendo here? He says, don't worry. The invitation will come from the Secretary of Defense. At this point, I'm thinking, oh my God, sweat, right? I ended up inviting someone I had met, again, at GDC the year prior. He had done a keynote talking about a multiplayer real-time strategy gaming engine that was really, really, really unique. And I remember thinking about it and thinking, if I ever wanted to do a true process change game, I was going to use his gaming engine, okay? And I'll describe it to you. Do you remember the movie Back to the Future? All right. You know the scene where McFly is holding a Polaroid picture of himself and he's slowly fading because of a decision made in the past? So this gaming engine works the same way, right? Each player has the ability to granularly manipulate time. You can move forwards in time, you can work backwards in time. And when I move backwards in time and change something, like implement a new kind of decision, that time wave will propagate to other players present, okay? Now if you think about it, it's like four-dimensional chess, right? What better way to collectively optimize a process than not only having a strategy game, but allowing everybody to change decisions along the timeline. In this way, you can vet, right? You're crowdsourcing, but it's highly visual, uses real historical data. So we get up and we co-pitch this. And by the way, that thing we went back for was the DARPA Innovation Summit, right? And he's like, all right, you're getting up, you're doing the keynote. So we go up and we show off this strategy game. And then he pulls me aside and he says, what are you doing 2 weeks from now? And you know, as a side note, at this point, I'm 8 months pregnant, right? So what are you doing 2 weeks from now? And we end up, that was pretty funny. Like, I don't know. So we end up going to the Secretary of Defense, and we showed it to him. Right? And we showed it to the head of DARPA. And at that point, IBM says, why don't you come and incubate a consulting practice around this serious games thing? So we started to do that. Again, we started to do it across industry, and this is the basic premise. Switching from planning to playing. You're playing through the scenarios. And what I want to tell you is that to really pull these kinds of things off, it takes a lot of muscle, right? The ability to take the real data, the ability to clean it, the ability to have a business process model, the cognitive computing components, right? The predictive modeling. So really what we ended up doing after several years of leading this practice within our consulting group was I moved to our cloud division because I wanted to create a game development ecosystem there to make it easier for others to do. To take these modular pieces, right? Everything that is described here, so you can more quickly and easily thread it together to make these kinds of advanced games I'm describing to you. All right? Have you guys heard of Watson? Right? Yeah? Okay. All right. So here's where I'm going with all this, and here's why I'm super excited. So there is a tremendous amount of potential in using games as a new mechanism for having a conversation with cognitive computing, or to get information from cognitive computing, right? So I mentioned to you, and again, you're already bought into the whole people-centric thing, that's obvious, right? But this ability to visualize the complexity, but again, powered by the historical data on the back end. Here's my scenario for you. Who here has played SimCity before? All right. In your typical SimCity, you're creating a city from scratch. So just imagine it in your minds, right? There's rolling green hills, and there's this lake, and you're trying to figure out the roads, and how do I get people into my city? And you're building all these utilities, and you decide, over time, you've got about 400,000 people in your city, but you only put down 3 fire stations. All right, so what happens? Who is it that says how the game is going to respond to 3 fire stations being put down in your city? It's the game designer, well before the city is shipped, right? They're in their basement, and they're saying, here's the rules and the thresholds, the radius around each fire station, right? The level of severity of the fire, how quickly it breaks out, how often it breaks out, how severe the fire is, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All of this is made up by a game designer, again, before it's shipped. Imagine instead a different scenario where the rules and the threshold for how the game responds is based on real data, right? Imagine if you can take, and again, you said you know what Watson is, right? So you've got the ability to take structured and unstructured data and use cognitive computing to ask questions of it. So imagine if the answers to those questions were fed into a strategy game or a city sim game. So now the way that you're determining how often those fires break out, what level of severity, yada, 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 is all played through via a city sim. You guys following what this means, right? Okay. An example, city resiliency game, right? If you could use a city sim, and again, with the same time manipulation component, which I mentioned to you earlier, where again, you can change your decisions over time. You're visualizing it, you're playing through with it. And I remember I was pitching this at a big, a genomics conference, right? And one of the scientists gets up and he says, so are you saying that IBM is going to know every single piece of data about the city of Barcelona and how to show it off in a game? I said, absolutely not. But we're going to be hosting a much smarter conversation about something very, very complex. And that's the premise, right? That's the premise. Here's some examples. And again, all of these web services are available up on our cloud via this development ecosystem which we've been creating, right? These are all Watson services. This one is called Retrieve and Rank, right? So you're asking questions of structured and unstructured data. It's able to rank them, like what is the percentage level of severity of that particular fire, knowing the historical data that it's being fed. Watson Dialogue, I'm going to show you an example of this in a minute. You can actually ask questions, like given this photograph of a cancerous tumor, how malignant is it? These are the kinds of questions you can feed into Watson Dialogue. This is really cool. Personality insights. We fed all of Donald Trump's Twitter feeds into Watson's personality insights. I highly recommend you check it out. It's real interesting. But it's fascinating, actually. So, you can use this, again, structured and unstructured data to determine how do people feel about certain things, right? And what would that look like in a serious game? Trade-off analytics, right? We're creating actually a wealth advisory game. Right, if I have this amount of wealth and I've got these different risks in my life, what are the different trade-offs in terms of what kinds of investments I make over time? But these are all pieces that you can weave together to develop new stuff, right? Same thing with Internet of Things as an example. Now I'm going to show you, this is something I'm really pumped about. It's a project, Medical Minecraft. We did this with a high school in Austin, Texas. Now, the reason I want to show you this is I don't want you to think, oh my gosh, this sounds really complicated. I don't think we can do it, all right? This is a school for disadvantaged teens. Actually, the lead for this project, the technical lead, and the game, was it not the game designer, but the lead artist, we just found out last week both of these kids got evicted from their homes. So they're now living in vans down by the river. Okay, so when I say disadvantage, I'm serious. The teacher for a class that teaches game design at this high school calls me up and he says, my kids have modded Minecraft. You guys are familiar with Minecraft. We're at Microsoft, so you guys should know Minecraft. They have modded Minecraft such that you're flying a nanobot through a human body. And when you come upon different viruses, right, like tuberculosis, for example, they wanted to be able to integrate the game experience with Watson, right, so that you can ask Watson questions about what kind of treatments to implement. So I'm going to show you this video real quick so you can get a sense. Hopefully this will work.
Because now we're getting feedback from Watson through the gameplay. This is what hasn't been done yet. And this is what's truly significant because we're bringing cognitive computing into game design.
We actually have developed a game development ecosystem on our platform as a service, on IBM Blueprint. And so what we did is we started to work directly with this particular class, giving them a recipe to follow with regards to not only how to stand up an instance of Minecraft on Linux, but also how to integrate it with different services available there, including our last service. So you're a level designer too.
Within this construct is the key or the code that will allow us to connect the dots between STEM, game design, serious game design, and Watson.
What I'm drawing is actually a disease monster that is based off of tuberculosis. Whenever it catches you, it will attack you, and you'll have periodic bleeding damage. And the only way you can fix it is finding a vaccine.
They do the research. They create their own company. They become their own project managers.
This class is giving us more than we signed up for. It's teaching us how to program, it's teaching us how to code, and it's teaching us how to make good teamwork.
Yeah, this isn't just a grade for us.
We're not learning for tests. We're actually learning for our own benefit.
I want to become a writer or a coder.
I want to be in the group that makes a good product that really gets people to enjoy what we're trying to do.
This is a path that can lead me to exactly where I want to be. Art is a big part of it, and I express myself in art in a lot of different ways.
You can just create entire worlds for people to explore, or you can create little tiny stories for them to enjoy.
They are seeing their research come to life through their game. And once that happens, that's when full immersion takes place. That's when full engagement takes place. And that's the dream of every teacher, to have that engaged classroom.
I do want to see one day that a game comes out that has one of my drawings or one of my ideas in it, and just see other people enjoying it. I think that would be the greatest feeling in the world. And I think this is just the kickstart. This is just the beginning.
So proud. I really am. I am so proud of this class. They're an amazing group of kids. And to think about what their lives are like, right? Living down by the river, right? And to see the level of engagement, they care and they love it. And it's because it's a game, right? It's a game, but for a purpose. And so I really think there's a serious secret sauce here that we need to be paying a lot of attention to, okay? So what we're doing to make this feasible, I know that used the Minecraft engine, but we're actually also creating SDKs for both the Unity and the Unreal gaming engines too, So Unity and Unreal, they're top 2 gaming engines in the world, right? And basically what we're doing is we're facilitating the integration of these cognitive computing services that we have on Bluemix, on our platform as a service, so that when you're in the game engine environment, you can easily integrate with it, okay? All open stack, right? So again, how do we facilitate this? Some other examples. The Suspect, this is an entertainment game. It got nominated for awards at the ITSEC conference this year. You're basically there's a murder suspect, right? And you're trying to figure out how to get into his head to find out what has happened and what's going on. That uses Watson Behavioral Insights. This is a cyber defense training game. This is a strategy game that uses Watson Dialogue, right? And the main coach within the game is this avatar called Athena, but it's actually Watson, right? And you're working through cyber defense strategies. You're actually crowdsourcing both proactive and reactive cyber defense strategies using that game. So we're creating a bunch of recipes, just like the one we did with Medical Minecraft. We've created a recipe for other schools to be able to follow, and we're creating recipes that can deploy into containers on this platform as a service so that we can make it even easier for developers to get started. And again, just how is it that you can piece together these different aspects, right, these different services in order to make something really, really new. So case studies, recipes, just making it easier to facilitate the ecosystem. I know I've thrown a lot at you, and I'm sure you have questions, but before I forget, I do a weekly podcast called gamesatwork.biz, and I interview all kinds of people from other companies. I don't do it alone. I do it with other folks, too. I actually had the director for Serious Games at Microsoft on my show, and he was awesome. He was talking about embedding personalities in buildings in order to change people's behavior, which was really interesting. But also, you're welcome to follow me on Twitter. So any questions? I know I've thrown a lot. Yes?
So this morning I told the mayor just about programs just like this. I see a lot of these programs that you were talking about, this program's in Austin. What is it here in the Bay Area, in our Silicon Valley that we can do? Because we don't seem to have a lot of these, we have like the mayor, we were talking about these programs, but there's some kind of disconnect. How do we, work with, you at IBM and these schools and make that a reality, and then put an economic development layer on, so that, when we have kids, especially underserved kids that really need to go to work, is there a mechanism for economic development or something for those kids to get paid, and then to be able to, work their way through school and be with you at IBM as a result?
I think there is. I know there is, in fact. So what I've been focusing on as of last April is creating this ecosystem, right? So the sandbox. How do I make it easier? Even easier, make it easier, make it cheaper, make it faster, right? That's what my focus was, because where I saw the trend, remember where I had that chart up where it was like, Candy Crush for recruitment and blah, blah. I mean, there's all these dreams. People had these big, big visions, and it cost a lot of money. It took a lot of time because people were starting from scratch, and it's unnecessary. So that's why I wanted to, put it all up. And what I'm trying to do is create enough enablement material, the recipes, the game-based curriculum, the enough toys to play with so that people can come up with their own new, fresh ideas. And what we were brainstorming, what Luke and I were talking about earlier, was possibly doing more and more game jams, right? Different from a hackathon, and the hackathons are typically like a weekend. These take a lot of time, right? To come up with a really good game design and to do all of this stuff. Something that had a very specific kind of focus, like Games for Good, as an example, that does this, that, and the other. And there's a bunch of themes, and maybe the themes have different kinds of corporate sponsors, potentially, right? And then you let people loose, whether it's students, whether it's entrepreneurs, whether it's startups, whether it's corporations, and you do it over a period of several months. This is one program which we're kicking off in earnest. So we're hoping to see more and more innovations in that regard. Does that make sense? Mentorship and the coaching and figuring out how to connect those developers who are making these really cool things with end customers that will purchase, right?
Absolutely.
And make that happen. Yes?
I didn't know if I heard you correctly. Did you say something about
We have a platform. So the way that it works is there's a platform as a service. And so it's a cloud offering, right, that has a whole bunch of different services in there, including the cognitive computing service, database as a service, blah, 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 blah. And what there is it's, there's a free trial, but it's also free to use up to a particular tier. In other words, once you get lots and lots of people using it, then you would pay based on use for the different services, just like the other cloud platforms. But it's open, completely open stack. So, but it's completely free to schools, 100% free to schools. Dimension free to schools, right? And there's also something called the Global Entrepreneurship Program, and they have also something called impact grants. So for both of these, like again, games for goods, good, smarter city civic engagement, right? There's grants and programs that will help get these things funded, right? So the development funded, the hosting funded, et cetera, when it becomes larger.
That schools thing, what age level is the entry point? I mean, is it strictly high school people that would have the confidence to work within that framework, or?
No. For the academic initiative program, well, for this high school, I'm trying to push it more for other high schools. Up to now, it's been universities and the professors who register their university and their classroom to be able to use the services on here. I think, especially given the medical Minecraft project, that we need to be going younger. I think there's an opportunity to go younger than university. I mean, again, I was blown away by these high school kids and what they're doing with, they were using Lego Mindstorm so that instead of using your joystick to move the nanobot around, you're moving a robotic arm to move the nanobot around. So it's just, I think we can go younger. Maybe we can help middle schoolers out, middle school's such a drag.
In that middle school age group, he's trying new stuff. But it's too much of a stretch probably.
For middle school, I would love to, maybe there's a piece of it, something. Certainly the game design component. There's some middle schools which are more progressive than others. We've got something called the P-Tech program, which targets specifically middle and high school kids, some elementary too. But I'd like to see more, more emphasis on coding, on cognitive computing.
For like single-digit grade, Scratch
Yeah.
by MIT. Now, middle school is not too early for kids to be doing this kind of stuff now. They're just, they put us all to shame in how smart they are.
It's true. Yes.
Was it surprised that, given that armed forces typically do a lot of simulation, a certain environment simulation is the way to operate before operating is necessary. So it's
Surprising.
Is it natural fit for them first? And then when I ask this question, I'm thinking businesses don't actually simulate in the same way armed forces do. And is that a problem?
It is a problem. And I see there's a tremendous need, especially around strategy. If you want to create an agile, adaptable strategy, why the heck aren't you using games? Why aren't you using strategy games in order to do that, right? This is something we're really trying to push. And I'm seeing, you'd be surprised which industries are being more progressive about this than others, which has been fascinating to watch. I think what has happened is a lot of them end up coming to us with cultural transformation challenges. And then when we talk to them and we show them, then they start to see, oh my gosh, we could do this for a lot more, right? How do we make more resilient, agile strategies, right? And how do we change our success metrics for our people? That's the kind of thing we start to see. But with defense, I was blown away. I've now been working with defense for many years, and my background wasn't in defense at all. I told you, we're doing women gamers, right? But I've learned so much. They had been investing so much in the first-person shooter at the platoon level, right? How do we train this particular soldier for this particular event? But it was the systems thinking, again, using games to help explain complex systems and to adapt strategies. They were doing a lot of things in first person. They would do these in-person operations to simulate prior to an event, right? But this is a different order of magnitude.
Right, and I guess my ask was, which industries are more likely to adapt first? So it's not surprising, medical, for instance.
Yeah, healthcare
is
for sure.
Much higher than I would guess others do, right? So from your perspective, which industries are showing up early adopters versus, hey, you're a late adopter in this space?
Yeah, healthcare for certain, finance, banking, right? They're leapfrogging, right, over others in terms of how they're tackling this, which I think is interesting. Certainly retail, customer facing, insurance, right? They're all moving forward very progressively in this arena. So, yes.
Can I ask you an engagement question? Just taking what you just asked about who's there. I deal with people in all those industries and beyond. Many great partnerships here. Is this unit positioned to start engaging with folks? I mean, how do we take what you've shown us today, which has been fabulous? So many opportunities. I want to know how we engage with that.
Reach out to me. Absolutely. We're open for business.
From American Express Open for Business.
Yes, I've worked with yeah, American Express is awesome. A pleasure.
Okay, I think that's a great note to end. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
That was
Thank
fantastic.
you so much.